Hey, Stuart. Hey, Mary.
Hello.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Stuart. How's everybody doing?
Good. I'm going on vacation next week, so I'm excited.
you.
It's been a
Yeah.
long and necessary time for me to get this. So my phone is going off, and anything that starts with an S is not going to be looked at.
Where are you going?
I'm excited. I'm taking my daughter. She's coming down here, and we're going to go to Universal and
Oh,
Disney
cool.
and all that. She loves Universal and Disney, so
Very
it's going to be
nice.
a nice daughter and mother trip that's well overdue. So I can't wait.
Good for you. Good for you.
Thanks.
Mr. Harburn, sir, how are you? Good to see you.
Oh, Hassan, nice to see you. Been a while.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
Hi, Mary.
Hi, Hassan.
Where are you?
I'm in the office.
That thing behind you is nice.
Yeah, that's in my office. It's been there. I
Did
got
you
it at Ross.
I'm not used to a good artwork at Sandag, you know.
didn't you guys close the office?
Yeah, but I just needed to be in the office. I had some flyers that I'm going to be networking on the week after next when I go to my fraud conference. I'm going to try to scoop some employees from there and entice them with beautiful colored flyers about how awesome it is to work at Sandag, and I'm hoping to pull somebody.
Oh my God, an auditor not following the rules. That's scary.
No, actually, the rules are stood if employees are allowed to telecommute, but if their supervisor asks them to come for business reasons, they have to be.
I see.
So we're even over the period of COVID, Mary knows this, 20% of our employees were coming to the office and will continue to do so.
Unless you have COVID. Unless you have COVID.
Unless you have COVID. If you have COVID, you have to wait until you test negative and then you come back.
Yeah, no COVID here.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
So the numbers in the county are way up, actually.
Yeah.
It is contagious, but it's not as bad. I mean, it's like most people tell me it's like a mild flu.
Mhm.
But we did have an outbreak in both of our locations, 401B and the toll authority.
Mary, do the theme parks have any regimen beyond, just normal stuff, or?
Disney, I think did, but I think they've released that since Universal doesn't seem to have it, and we're going to just hang out at downtown Disney because she's been there a million times. So Universal we haven't been to in many years, so we're going to hang out there most of our time. So at this point, they don't even require masks, so we'll see.
So did I see Mr. Marshall here or?
Yes, Hassan,
are
I
you?
am. I'm trying to get the video to come up for me. And it's not doing it.
And your audio is echoing, Bob.
Oh, okay.
I see Chair Zito and I see Councilmember Musgrove there too.
Yes, Chair Zito, would you like to test your audio visual, please? And Councilmember Musgrove is.
Yeah, I'm testing. I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
I can hear you fine, and I'm in my car, so unless you want to see El Cajon in the background on the way to San Marcos, I'll let you know if I
Thank
lose
you.
contact. Thank
Hey,
you.
nothing wrong with seeing El Cajon.
I was out visiting my brother, talking
Well,
about
that's
the
good.
game tonight, so hopefully we'll get another win.
So, Francesca, do we have a quorum?
We actually
Huh.
do have a quorum, Chair. 4 of your 6 members are present.
Okay, let me see. Maybe I'll wait one more minute.
Chair Zito,
Yeah.
can you hear me? My video appears not to be working, so hopefully you can all hear me.
We can hear you just fine, Bob. Thanks
Okay,
for checking
fine.
it. And hopefully the video is a temporary thing. let's see, so. Give it one more minute. Okay, well, we have a full agenda, so might as well go ahead and get started. Hopefully others will join us. Welcome to the Sandag Audit Committee, Friday, June 10th, 2022 at 12:30 p.m. Before we get started, I'd like to ask our interpreter, Nancy Hand, to introduce herself and walk through how to access our interpretation services for today's meeting. Nancy?
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Hand, and I'll be the interpreter for this afternoon's meeting. And I will give instructions for accessing the interpretation function on Zoom, first in Spanish and then in English. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, el globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en un celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos o 3 puntos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. To use the Zoom interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are located. Click on the interpretation icon, which is a globe, and select either English or Spanish. If you are joining using the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. That was very clear. Before we get into our regular program, I did just want to make a statement or a comment that and let folks know that today, June 10th, is the 23rd birthday of my daughter, who passed away on February 15th of this year. So I apologize if I'm a little bit distracted today. I'll do my best, and I intend to adjourn the meeting today in honor of my sweet Mary, just to let you know. With that, we will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Could I have a volunteer to lead us in the pledge from staff somewhere or board member?
I can.
Oh, that'd be great, Hassan.
So please repeat after me. I pledge the
Allegiance
To
to
the
the
flag
flag
of the
of the
United
United
States,
States of America,
to the
And
and
the
to the
republic
republic
for which it
for which
which
stands,
it stands,
one nation,
one nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and
and
justice for all.
Great. Thank you, Hassan. So we will now move into our agenda, and the first thing is approval of the meeting minutes. Do we have any, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak to the meeting minutes? Please raise your hand. I see none. Any board members that would care to speak? Otherwise, I entertain a motion to approve.
Musgrove will move to approve.
Thank you, Stuart. I'll go ahead and second. Motion by Mr. Halpern, second by Zito. Please call for the vote, Francesca.
For approval of the minutes, Chair Zito,
Zito, yes.
Vice Chair Vasquez is absent. Councilmember Musgrove,
Yes.
Ms. Wong Nickerson is absent. Mr. Halpern,
Halpern, yes. Just to correct the record, I believe it was Councilmember Musgrove who actually made the motion.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
oh, thank you for that. And Mr. Monson,
Monson, yes.
that item passes unanimously with those members present.
Great, thanks. Now we will go ahead and move on to public comments and member communications. I see, oops. I was thinking I think Mayor Vasquez is waiting to be promoted.
I just promoted Mayor Vasquez.
Okay.
If we want to give her a minute to indicate her vote on the first item.
Okay,
and Mr. Mansour is raising his hand.
yeah, I'll take, once we get to this, I'll take public member comments first. But as looks like Mayor Vasquez.
I apologize, Chair. Yeah, I'm attempting to promote Mayor Vasquez, but
Okay, well, why don't we move
up to
on?
you.
I'll let you work that behind the scenes.
Thank you.
I see a public member comment from Dr. Tim Bylash.
Yes, Mr. Bailish, go ahead and unmute.
Yes, if you can hear me, thank you for taking this comment. It's a long meeting. I just wanted to commend the SANDAG staff and administration and the members of the committees. You've been through difficult times the past few years. You do exemplary work. It's a long meeting. I will send some comments relative to the audit agenda today directly to SANDAG, if that's okay. I hope you'll take them in stride. And I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like Bob, you have a comment?
Yeah, just a real quick one, Chair Zito. As was in the minutes from the last meeting, Agnes and I were placed on a subcommittee to perform Mary's performance review, and I sent out surveys. Today is the last day to get those surveys done. Those of you that have done them, thank you very much for your input. Again, input is critical to this process. For those that you haven't had the time yet, please take the time to complete them. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And your input is very, very important. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. And yes, I'll second that. I'll note that I have already completed the feedback portion myself, so I strongly encourage others to do so as well. It's a part of what we do here and important. So thanks for that. I don't see any other comments at this point. And so we will go ahead and move on to the agency report. And Hassan, since you're here, I'm guessing you're taking this?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair, committee members, and Mr. Manson. I did mine too. So, I did it a week ago almost. I didn't know the deadline is that long here, but thank you. Good to be with you. Good to see all of you. I do want to report to you on a few things that I think is important for you as committee member to know. I know that in the last few months, you've been hearing a lot of political speeches and, you know, people who are positioning themselves to talk about SANDAG. Here, what I want you to know about SANDAG. And this is just in the last few weeks. As I told you many times, judge the agency by what it delivers. And last November, it delivered the largest infrastructure project in San Diego's history on time and budget. Last Saturday, together with Caltrans, we delivered the North Coast Corridor, and Chair Zito, you were there. I was really honored and blessed to be with 1,200 of the community members in a beautiful Saturday morning under one of the busiest bridges, looking at a $70 million lagoon restoration and active transportation infrastructure for San Diegans for multi-generation to enjoy. $400 million, it's beautiful. And I will stop right here because I don't know there's anybody else besides Chair Zito there, but I hope, Chair Zito, you share my enthusiasm. I'll let you say a few words if you want on this one.
Oh, it was a great event, and it was a great event for a really good purpose. I mean, the infrastructure and the other amenities that have been put in that area are tremendous, and they demonstrate really well what a multimodal corridor transformational project can look like. And I appreciate all the staff's work and appreciate all the staff's attendance in putting on such a great event. But it was well attended and an appropriate celebration.
Thank you. And this really, as the chair alluded to, at SANDAG, we care about every part of the region, whether you live in the east, the south, the inland, coastal, inland, North County. Every part of the region is important. This North Coast Corridor is the very definition of the complete corridors that we put out in the 5 big moves. A lot of work. Again, partnership with Caltrans is instrumental. We're the envy of the state when it comes to this partnership. And I can thank the teams that made this possible. And I'm really happy for the community. And I want to thank Chair Zito and the other elected leaders who came Saturday to celebrate with the community. This week, actually specifically Wednesday, myself and a few of my team members, we were in front of the Coastal Commission. This is about the $100+ million Del Mar Plus 5 stabilization. If you recall, in February 2020, the bluff collapsed. We had to slow the trains down. We were concerned. We went out to Sacramento. We got $110 million from the rail funding, and we went to work to replace the sea wall that collapsed, which lasted over 100 years, and also to install piles. Look, I mean, you know the Coastal Commission, and you know it's really a tough group, but I'm happy to report to you that we got a unanimous Coastal Commission approval of a recommendation of the federal certification. And not only we get approval, we got a great comments from the chair and vice chair on the partnership that SANDAG and the Coastal Commission have. Same partnership that happened in the North Coast Corridor extended here. So now we are ready to move with the design of Del Mar Bluff Stabilization 5, rebuilding the seawall, installing the steel piles to reinforce the corridor while we're preparing to move the track of the bluff. Again, an important part of the region, an important milestone for SANDAG and its work. And I wish that we continue to deliver for Sandiagan as such. Yesterday morning, I was honored to be early morning with our elected leaders, Mary Gloria, Supervisor Vargas, our chair Blake Spear, Council Member Vivian Merino, to do the ribbon cutting in the Bayshore Bikeway, the Paralogan segment. This is a 2.3-mile segment that connected the east to the west. Now we can bike all the way to National City. And again, this is delivering to Sandiagans. This is being true to the social equity and social justice we've been discussing. And just last week, our board appropriated $17.3 million to fund the Eastern Hillcrest Bikeway. And that really we're beginning to see an semblance of network, active transportation network in the region. I know that will make the chair bike much easier because I've seen him on bikes many times. But I promise you that by the time we're done with this, Sandiagans for generations to come will enjoy a safe way of entertaining when it comes to active transportation. Again, the bikeway, as I said, will connect two existing segments of the Bayshore Bikeway and will extend 2.3 miles along Harbor Drive between Park Boulevard and the 32nd Street. We are continuing to make sure that the mistakes of this bike program and the slowdown in the bike program does not continue. Right now, we believe we are in the cusp of meeting our obligation to deliver for Sandiagans what we promise them to do. In the last couple of months, we hosted here in San Diego the American Planning Association meeting and the American Public Transportation APTA. We hosted the Urban Land Institute. We were featured in many of the speaking panels on these, but I can tell you the people coming to San Diego, this is just not just the weather, but they're really impressed with what SANDAG is trying to do for Sandiagans. And part of that, we hosted the FTA Deputy Administrator, Veronica Vanterpool, at Sandag, and we did a couple of tours with her. Just to inform you that you heard from Mary on the 125, the toll road. And as I told the board and I told you, I took full responsibility for the mishaps that made us lose $1.8 million because repairs that should have been done in 2007 are not done. And again, here I want to thank Mary and the team for looking into this. We took action, we took personal action, and we are also taking quick action to put the right technologies in place. Next weekend, the southbound lanes of the State Route 125 toll road will be closed from State Route 54 to E&H Street. So we can install equipment that can better read a different kind of transponders. This improvement will continue so that what happened through the dysfunctioning of the stations will never happen again. And I'm pleased to report that this is taking place, also is taking place, bringing in a director for the toll operation that I will be reporting on to the board shortly. Just a note that Juneteenth falls on a Sunday this month, and we will be observing it on Monday, June 20th. Let me conclude by doing this. Today, you're going to hear from our independent auditor, Mary Kay, and our staff about our proposed policies from the PCAR audit. And let me just say a couple of things about this. I told the board in my report in the last couple of weeks, coming to an agency being is sometimes scary, but it's also said that you're going to have some growing pains. I couldn't be more grateful for Mary and her team trying to be a partner with me and my team to move this agency forward. We have definitely a lot of areas where it needs attention, controls, and policies, and that's what this audit was about, and that is what the next audit. So I told my board, be patient. Let us do what's right. And the political speeches aside, the fact is we all have a stake in making sure Sandag works better. I also reminded them that they always complain about 805, and they might have reasons to, and that's up to them. But one good thing that about 805 is created the performance independent auditor that I believe is so critical to the agency and its mission. Whether it's me or the next CEO or the next CEO, you need to make sure this agency is accountable. So when you hear today about the new controls and policies put in place that we, both management and Mary together, you're going to hear from Colleen, and unfortunately Ray is not here today. We mean what we say. We want all the controls and policies. But as you know also that these audits is becoming a political mechanism for some to go and give speeches and hurt the agency in the process. And I told my board at the retreat, Mary was there, I said, I'm a fair game. You can go after me and do whatever you want. Totally fair. But don't go after the agency and hurt the agency and demoralize the staff in the process. And so again, I'm really grateful that we have a performance auditor who are here and her staff have the same goal like we do. We're independent, but our goal is identical. That is to put the controls and policies to make this agency is covered. So with that, Mr. Chair, concludes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Hassan. Do we have any public comments on the chair, on the executive director's report?
Chair, I do not see any hands raised for public comments on this item.
Okay, thanks. Do we have any board members wishing to make comments? Please raise your hand. If you do so, Stuart.
Thank you. Just one question on the Coastal Commission. I seem to recall an account in the press that suggested that the Coastal Commission might have been requesting some additional investments or requirements relating to the project that were beyond what NCTD was looking for. Could you speak to whether there are any issues that came up in that regard?
Yes, it did. And I also need to make sure I'm up front with you. NCTD have concerns about the action that we took to the commission and we got approval for. The commission, the deal was very clear. The commission will give us the federal certification to move forward with the stabilization. In return, we have what's called environmental mitigation fund. We will use that environmental mitigation fund to enhance the access to the beach. And then that's not something new. As to the fence that NCTD is proposing, we stayed out of that. We didn't want to, one goal of ours was to decouple the fence discussion from the stabilization discussion. And so, yes, NCTD did send us a letter. It's a public letter. I think if you don't mind, Colleen, make sure someone send it to the members that indicating some concern about that. But as far as we are concerned, the safety is #1 priority. We want this is a critical corridor for the country, national defense, for the state, and for us as a region. It has to be functioning safely at all times. So for us going into this, we will not spare any cost to make sure that this corridor is stable and safe until we move the track of the bluff. And so in the process, we're going to use some environmental mitigation fund to enhance access to the beach.
Got it. Thank you. The media account wasn't as clear, so I appreciate the clarity. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart.
Be careful with all media accounts. I mean, like the media said, anyways, I'll stop right there.
Yeah. let's keep it on a good right. Ending. Although, right. Thanks, Stuart. It's a good question. It could go on a really long time, and hopefully we won't go on too. I did want to follow up based upon your comments, Hassan, a little bit as well. It's obviously, while I think it's an admirable goal to keep the fence discussion separate, it's obviously very important that we don't do stupid government things. So if we build beach access, but then NCTD gets the right to build their fence that then cuts off that beach access, we both have egg on our face.
Absolutely.
So we need to make sure that doesn't happen as well as we go forward. And I have every faith that this agency won't, but I don't want to see that one in the press. It's like, here's the fence, here's the stairs that go nowhere. But
I mean, I want to be as sure as you are that it won't happen, Chair.
Yeah.
I can tell you that it is really sometimes shocking discussion when you hear people say, well, I don't care, I'm just going to do my fence, and you go do your access. Like you said, I do an access, nobody can access it. What's the point of investing a few $1 million in there? I believe with your leadership and others in the region, we're going to get to the bottom of this. But I really didn't want Sandak to be involved in almost a legal discussion of the right way and the Transportation Service Board. But I'm as you, faithful that this will be resolved before we get to that point.
I certainly hope so too. So thanks for that. Seeing no other board members with their hands up, we will go on to item 4, which is an update from the Office of the Independent Auditor. And Mary, take it away.
Thank you, everybody. Hello. Sorry, we're again not in person. I was looking forward to that. I'll be quick on this. We are still looking for employees. And that's our biggest struggle right now. The screen's moving all over the place. So with that, it's a little frustrating for me. I thought I had a candidate. The expectations was a little too much for me, and I decided to part ways with that. So we're out searching. I'm hopeful. We have a principal and an auditor 1 now to fill. Initially, I was going to fill that auditor 1 with my wonderful intern, but since she's decided to move on to a graduate program, which I'm really happy and excited for her. But with that, she's also going to be leaving Sandag, which saddens me a lot. So we're actually losing now our intern as well. So we have a conference to go to the week after next, a fraud conference, which I have got some help from HR, Tala, who's been amazing in helping me in this journey, even with my frustrations of getting someone and then losing them. But she made some really nice colored flyers for both the positions, and they look awesome and they're very tempting. And I'm hoping to, between me and my staff, to pass these out and have some networking and some really good conversations with some of these CFEs who are experienced in fraud and CPAs. So I'm hoping to get some good catches there and convince them how wonderful it would be for them to come to San Diego and work. So I hope I have some success there. With that, I've really framed the audit plan, which I'll talk about later on today, around the consideration that we're lacking some resources. Hopefully, if we are able to add in those resources along the way, it will still be the focal of those areas in which I've identified in the audit plan, because those are the highest risk areas of the agency, and the continuous auditing will allow us to take any extra resources we get along the way and just put those within that process, and we'll just be able to do more of those types of continuous auditing. So other than that, I have no further updates, and we can move on and have a discussion on the other items that I'll be talking about today.
Great, thank you. Any public member comments on Mary Kay's update?
There are no hands raised on this item.
Thanks, Tessa. Any board members wish to make a comment? Raise your hand, please. I see none. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 5, the Office of the Independent Auditor Summary of Audits and Recommendations and Status for 21-22. Mary.
Thank you. This is, again, we've been offering these reports on a quarterly basis. So really, the fraud, waste, and abuse report is really pretty much the same as what we just submitted to you, I believe, last meeting. There have been no changes. The investigations are still ongoing. They're based on priorities. I believe we have currently 7 investigations that are open. One is getting ready to close. I believe I have enough information there to determine the legitimacy of the complaint and what we're doing to close that matter out. So that will be updated next quarter when I submit the fraud, waste, and abuse report to you. The other item is what we provide to you at year end, which is quite a large document, and it's not easy to read if you print it out. And we are trying our hardest to see how we can make this work somehow. So we continue to play with this. I know that there's a possibility to us. We do put it on our website and make it linkable to where if you look on the link, then it's readable. But to actually be able to print it out, it's such tiny writing, and we've really tried to work with that. So we're really going to have to see the information that's on it. I'd like to minimize it, but it's all really important information. And it's important that the public and that we're being very transparent around the detail. And so I'd hate to cut any of that information out. There are, areas that are corrective action plans that were identified that, we continue to reach out to management and help us to either say that they've been resolved or that they're delayed, and if they've been delayed, why they're delayed, or if they're just at a point where they're no longer relevant. And if that's the case, we need to get that information and show us that they're not relevant so we can just remove them. Because I know that sometimes audits, something changes. And so you may have had a corrective action item that is no longer relevant to the matter. And I just need that evidence, right? And then I can just remove it. And that will make the report a little bit smaller too. So, with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But really, this is a management tool. We do this because it had never been done before. No one really knew all the audits that were out there on Sandag, and now they do. And so, we're really trying to keep this up and provide this information to be transparent as a public agency around all the audits that are done. We keep it back 5 years forward, and it shows all the corrective action plans and how we're doing on addressing those corrective actions. One of the biggest areas of concern around corrective action plans in government in general, and is a struggle with everybody, is often an audit happens, corrective action plan follows it, and then nothing ever happens. And so what we're trying to do is be different here at SANDAG. We are trying to actually implement corrective action plans and make sure the actions are taken. And if they're not, state why it's no longer necessary. So we think this document, though it is management's responsibility to keep it updated for us, we want to continue to facilitate this because it is so very important, in my opinion, to ensure that the agency is being held accountable and not just, okay, the audit's over, let's move on. But the audit's over, it identified areas of corrective action, let's make sure they're done. And I am happy to be the facilitator of that. So if you have any other questions regarding the fraud, waste, and abuse or that report, I'm happy to answer them.
Great, thanks, Mary. Tessa, do we have any public speakers? Looks like I see a hand up.
Yes, sir, we do. Dr. Tim Balazs. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. A great report, Mary. I really appreciate your comments. I think they're very pertinent. I wasn't going to say anything, but you made such an eloquent presentation. I had to for that. I just might introduce here an idea. I mostly get some of this information off of the local media. And one organization in particular has been kind of paying attention, but I'm not aware what SANDAG connections are to the reporters that are writing on these stories, other than through some of the heads of the organizations. You mentioned that this is mostly a management tool, and even as so, it is kind of dense and very difficult. But how can it be distilled so that the information that gets out to the media is accurate and up to date and allays suspicions or misuse for political purposes? And so I just raised this issue. I hope it's appropriate. I know it's a long meeting. And again, Mary, I thank you and the organization. And I think the hiring issues are going to only be compounded over the next year. And I wish you the best for that. If there's anything we can do, let the public know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balazs. Yeah, if you know any good auditors, feel free to send them our way. That's the best thing we can do. But and just making a comment on his comments too, I did want to just note that if the other part of being able to frame this such the information isn't misused, I also think is probably an impossible task as well. But I do think in general, we work hard at trying to create good summaries. And if people pay attention to those summaries, the intent of the summaries are to point out the really important items. Now that's more difficult to do in this annual report type format, but when each one of these status things come up for review, Mary's K teams, at least for the audits that she owns, does a really good job of summarizing the key items that are meant to be the takeaways. But of course, that'll never prevent anybody from politicizing data that they see in there to their own benefit, which alludes earlier to Hassan's complaint as well. And wish there was something we can do about it, but that will always prove a challenge, I think. Okay, I don't see any other public member comments. Ms. Wong Nickerson.
Yeah, thank you so much for providing that information. It's very comprehensive. I do have a question about that. There's several cases being investigated right now, right? And I noticed that there are about 3 of them related to outside consultant and contractors. And can you, I also know that you're going to do a audit on contract in general in this coming year. I assume that you will be focusing, pay some attention to that particular area since we have, 3 reports, coming in. Just, if you can talk a little bit about that in general, that'd be really helpful.
Sure, Agnes. So without going into too much detail, because right now it's an investigation with potential, right? And so there's allegations, and so we have to be very careful to share information that might be harming or defamation to somebody that's an outside contractor until we can fully say that yes, what has been, the allegations have been are actually proven. And that's what the investigation is to go through that process. But I will share that those 3 entities were actually part of our sample in our audit that we would have been auditing anyways, because they are of higher risk and they are material. But when this additional information came through the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline, I then pulled those from the audit to make it specifically a review of the fraud, waste, and abuse, because we don't want to be coupling them. We don't want it to be part of the audit when it's already part of the investigation. So it really needs to be separate, because what comes out of the audit might make it look more like a matter around what Sandag did wrong and what Sandag needs to fix, when in fact the investigation is really about what possibly these contractors have done. And so keeping them separate, 1, it doesn't overlap or waste time, and 2, it clearly defines who is at fault for what.
Okay, so there will be separate investigation on these 3 cases, so you
Completely.
can validate, if it's legitimate or not, right? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I actually had a question for you as well, Mary, which is the status of the actual audit reports and statuses. For our your team's generated reports, I very much believe that the status indication in there is generated by you and your team as to what the latest status is of that. For the ones that are not owned by your team, how are the statuses generated? Are they generated by management, or who's putting in that particular status indication?
Sure. So we, as I said, we as auditors facilitate the tracking of it, but we actually reach out to the person that's responsible to address those corrective action plans. Because as you're aware, auditors, when they return for the next audit, they will always go back and say, what have you done on the prior plan, if you had a corrective action, or the prior findings, what have you done around those? So it's really the auditor's job is that, but it really is the management's responsibility to make sure that those action plans are, addressed, that they're updated when necessary, and that they report it to us. So it's not the auditor's responsibility. The only responsibility the auditors really have is to, when they come back to audit that area again, to say, did you correct what was found last time? It's really management to keep true to their commitment to a corrective action plan that they've submitted and agreed to, and that they provide, they 1, do it, or 2, provide why they're not doing it and updates on that. From an internal perspective, my plans, how, I just, again, as the auditor in-house, I have on my calendar a quarterly reminder that says to me, follow up with so-and-so around vendor, follow up with so-and-so around salaries and benefits. So I then just, as a courtesy, reach out to them and say, hey, it's time for your guys' quarterly review around this plan. Please update it or give me what you've done on it. And I will be, honest, around the last few, management has been really proactive, and they've been, reaching out even before I reach out and say, hey, we've done some corrective actions around this plan and we want to get it submitted to you. And, sometimes
that's helpful. I guess like for me, just a specific example that I found interesting is under the Transnet Triennial Performance Audit, the first finding was that they need to clearly identify the remaining projects and whether or not they're part of the 2021 Regional Transportation Plan before the Sandag boards approves the 2021 Regional Transportation Plan, and that's marked as yellow as in progress. But of course, the board approved that plan 6 months ago. So who actually ascertained that yellow is appropriate for that particular item?
And if you go Chair Zito, on the report and you look over a little bit, you'll see who is responsible.
Okay,
And it's that party that has given us the information.
okay.
Yeah.
That one, because like that one in particular seems like it could be more correctly represented in my mind.
Well, no, and that makes sense. And that's where I kind of go back to, you know, management, making sure that they're doing their diligence, and it's not management in general, but it's the individual who's assigned to assure that they're doing their diligence around addressing corrective action and keeping us updated.
Okay.
Sometimes it's just, they don't get back to us. Sometimes it's not my job, but even though they've been identified as it, so we try to find, well, whose job is it then? So, you know, the struggle for us is it takes a lot of our resources to hunt who is responsible down. And so we really have to at one point cut it and say, okay, we have the information, we're going to report on it, and we're going to let, you know.
No, it's great. It's great to have the information centrally located. I truly appreciate that. And it's really nice. I was just trying to clarify how the status items get generated. So, you know, it makes it helpful for those who need to follow up, or the particularly important items, because that one was marked as critical. It's going to make me feel like, well, let's go have a conversation and see if this one's moved along in an appropriate way. But
just to be, you know, to be fair to my staff, we do reach out on those yellow and red ones. We do send emails out to those individuals and say, we're going to be reporting to the audit committee and we need an update. Sometimes we get a response and sometimes we don't.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't see any other board members with comments, hands up. If that's the case, I'd entertain a motion to recommend forwarding this to the full board.
I'll submit the motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. I
I
think
second.
that was a motion by Mayor Vasquez and a second by Bob. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Please call for the vote.
On, I believe it's item 5, Chair Zito,
Zito, yes.
Vice Chair Vasquez,
Vasquez, yes.
Ms. Wong Nickerson,
Wong Nickerson, yes.
Stuart Halpern,
Halpern, yes.
and Robert Munson.
Monson, yes.
Thank you. That item passes unanimously.
Great, thank you. We'll then move on to item number 6, which is the proposed Office of Independent Performance Auditor annual audit plan for the upcoming year. Mary, again.
Yes, thank you. So the audit plan, again, is the same as last year. We have a risk discussion with board members who are the governing board, and that's required under professional auditing standards. We also have discussions with the audit committee, members of executive management, and anyone else who wants to have a risk discussion with us. I will say this time, a little short notice, but we did it. Stuart found that it would be helpful to offer ITALK, who is does play an important role around Transnet, and there could be risk, to just let them know what I do on an annual basis, and that I do discuss risk, and also invite them to have discussions. And I will say almost every one of them did reach out to me after that share, and did have risk discussions with me. And I think those discussions were very helpful to both parties. A lot of good discussion came out of those. So I also incorporated and considered those areas of risk that were shared as well. And then overall, there's a risk consideration from an audit perspective, which is also done. And that's sort of like the control risk that you're aware of around the agency, as well as the inherent risk of the agency. So taking all of that into consideration, we come up with a risk or a trigger of risk around certain areas within the agency, whether it be as a result of controls or as a result just inherently a risky area. So with that, we take the available resources that we have to perform these types of reviews, and we determine then the best use of those resources. In addition to doing that and having this direct audit plan that does various audits, we also consider how we impact and how we fit into the organization. So we have our own goals. We have, of course, the performance measures that the IPA is held to ensure that I'm doing my job, not just on behalf of my staff, but that I am following standards and that I'm doing my job for the better or for the good of the agency. So goals are set up, and those goals are defined clearly and how they interact with the strategic goals of SANDAG, as well as our OPA's goals, as well as professional standard goals. So all of this is encapsulated, and then we identify those and the benefits derived from those. And I think this is really a useful tool for me. I look at it quarterly and make sure that I'm keeping my commitment to these goals, that I'm meeting them, and that I tweak them where they're needed to be when I'm not on target or when something else has come up during the year that I need to adjust or consider within, again, this bowl of resources that we have. So that's why you will see the first part is really our strategic, our own goals from OPA, how they align with the organizational's goals. Then we go into the performance measures, and that's really my measures of, am I keeping my commitment to the organization and doing what I'm supposed to be doing, both on behalf and for SANDAG and also for my staff. And then the last part is the actual plan. And you can see we identify what we do sort of on a continuous basis, what's expected of us, and how that supports either the compliance, operational, transparency, the quality of the organization. And then the last part is the actual hours. This year, assuming with the assumption that I have somebody on staff by August, which it's not looking good. I hate to say that at this point, but it's going to be a little tweaking, and that's fine. I've identified really 3 areas, with one area being really the main focal point, and that is around continuous auditing. So continuous auditing is the best bang for your buck. It's where you identify high risk, but you don't have a lot of resources. In the past 3 years, we have done some really specific audits. And in that, we've identified areas where there were control weaknesses, a lack of training, a lack of policies, and all of this is now in the works of being corrected. And so those areas, just because they've got new policies in place and they're following new practices and all this other stuff, doesn't make them less risky. Because now it's time to hold them accountable and make sure that they're actually following those policies and procedures. They're actually got the controls, and the controls that they said they were putting in place actually work. This is now where we've derived ourselves, we've become, and now it's a continuous auditing. So its focus is continuous auditing around operational processes and system controls, around contracts mainly, purchase cards, and other areas such as travel, the reimbursement. We have some hours there that were committed, and our major function would be around that of contracts, because we are in a organization that has more contracts both on the consulting and construction side than probably any other agency around San Diego. So it is a high risk area. And now that we are able to do continuous auditing, we don't look back 5 or 6 years and say, this is what they did and this is what they need to fix, and because that's assumed to be all working well now. So now the best bang for your buck is to do continuous auditing on today's stuff. So it's as things are moving along, as they are creating contracts, as they're using the purchase card with all these new policies and controls in place, are they following them? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? And the greatest thing about that is we're in the now. We're in the now with them and working with them in the now. And that helps to ensure that, they're getting it and they're following their new policies and procedures and the controls are working. And it catches anything that needs still to be, tweaked or if someone isn't following the policies and procedures. So that's how this new audit plan is set up. Most agencies in government, once they've done these deep dives that we're finishing up with contracts right now and do move to a continuous auditing process. Like I said, it's the most beneficial for the organization. It's the best bang for your buck. So with that, we had 4,910 hours, and we have distributed them evenly, with the focal point being on contracts, which is the highest risk this agency has. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great, thanks, Mary. Any members of the public have questions on the audit plan?
I see no hands raised, Chair, for this item.
Thank you. Any board members care to make questions or comments on the audit plan for the year? Guess I'll start off with first question of Mary, myself, of, it was great that you had good participation. So thanks for your proactivity about going and getting participation from the other board members and the recommendations. Did you find, there was one item in there that was said, it was, the recommendation was from the board member, which was the business and travel reimbursement. I don't know if that was something that came out of one of those interviews, but I guess the question I was going to ask is was there a recurring theme? And if so, is that, did it influence your plan in that sense?
Yes, it did. So there were more than one board member that had concerns around that. Okay. So that did influence it somewhat, but I will also share that it's not I don't think a full 5 years and all that is needed, but it is a natural line of an auditor would go look at when you have purchase cards and you had issues around the use of that and the lack of documentation. You do typically go to the other side of that, which is a reimbursement, and you do typically look to make sure that it's not happening there as well, because then you do need to set a continuous auditing around that as well.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And then the hours that you've listed, do those include your hours as well?
No, the hours, because my hours are more around investigations, around director type things. And also I am the quality control reviewer. So every audit, I do a QC and a third level review on. And so those hours are not part of the hours in that bodied.
Okay, yeah, well, and the reason I'm asking is one of the things that isn't addressed in here is just the amount of, or I should say a plan on how much will be tackled with respect to the fraud, waste, and abuse reports. And clearly this year we had a significant growth. I don't know if you have an opinion if we will continue to grow, if you think it'll remain relatively flat, and our ability to continue to tackle the reports that come in through the fraud, waste, and abuse line under the current structure. With this plan.
Well, thank you. It's definitely a lot of work.
Yes.
And it's work that is on top of all the other work that me as a director is required to do on top of the reviews that I do with auditing. When I'm inserting myself around audits, and it happens often, I'm having these fraud discussions, these brainstorming discussions. All of that is not part of the hours for the staff to do the audit. So all of this is really overwhelming, frankly. And that's why when I do find, and why I'm hoping to get a certified fraud examiner like myself, when I go to this meeting, it would benefit me, because then I can allocate half of their time to working with me on investigations and the other half on audits. But frankly, while we're having an increase in these type of investigations, and by the way, 3 of these investigations are going to be very lengthy and time consuming. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documents to look at and things to consider. So ultimately, I would love to have a 1 or 2 time full-time certified fraud examiner to help me with these investigations. And it would truly benefit Sandag if we could do that.
Yeah, I just think the reason I'm asking is because, part of our task is to recommend this plan to the board. And I'd like to understand if part of that recommendation should be a note or a consideration saying that, we may, our plan is to go hire such a person, individual, right? But if that doesn't happen, we may fall behind on fraud, waste, and abuse investigations, given the current rate that they're coming in. So my question to you is that a fair statement? And if so, I think it would be useful to forward something like that to the full board as well, so they know.
Come on, you little fucking idiot, your little fucking idiot car.
Hey, Ed, you're not on mute. So,
apologies.
Sure thing.
I was
just worried you were yelling at me. That's all.
I've got someone on their phone almost ran into me.
Okay. Anyway, so back to my topic. So does that seem like a reasonable inclusion as far as our recommendation that goes to the board?
No, it absolutely does, Chair. And like I said, my intent is, as I'm looking for a certified fraud examiner on top of a CPA, I'm really looking as a succession plan, right? I'm always looking, thinking about succession planning. And I also will share, I have Mike, and who has been an amazing auditor. He's catching on quickly, and I am encouraging him strongly to get his CFE next year, and I think I've got him convinced. So
okay, well, I guess we can all go drop little pleasant hints as well. No, without overwhelming him. I don't want to overwhelm Mike. Okay, there. I can't quite tell who won the hand race. Stuart, you're on top of the list, so I'll go with you first.
Okay, thanks. Actually, following on from where the chair was going in his question, Mary, I just wanted to ask, you're showing us the plan given the resources you're expecting / hoping to have. I'm wondering if you could give us some insight as to what the next couple of items that didn't make the cut would be, and a sense, if there's any way that you can give us a sense of scope and magnitude, whether it's, dollars amount relating to the program, you know what I mean? Just to give us some context as to what we're leaving, what's not going to happen in the next year because you actually don't expect to have the resources.
Sure. So that's a good question. So two areas really, I think, if we had more staff, well, one, I would beef up more looking at contracts, because that's a huge area for SANDAG and risk, and it always is inherently. But two areas around contracts sort of is, we get a lot of federal money here and a lot of state pass-through money. And what I would love to be able to audit, and I know that there is a need around that, is the required performance measures and end result based outputs that are really required to be tracked and documented by each federal grant. So every federal grant now, and this started in 2015 under OMB, required that, and the reason it happened is there was a lot of grants that were being given out that where agencies made promises that this would happen and this would be the benefit. But there was never no real documentation required or performance measures that were required to be set up that had end result based outcomes. So in 2015, OMB required that there's performance measures for each grant that's issued, federal grant money that's provided. You have to have an output or an end result base. So it's got to be measurable. You have to say, this is the impact and here's the evidence that this is the impact. And that has to be documented and tracked, and it has to be set up. And I'm not sure that that's happening at SANDAG. And I'm not sure if it is happening, is it happening consistently? And is it properly supported and documented? Because that's very important should the feds come and actually audit around specific grant programs for those specific items. So I would like to be able to work with management and have that extra person looking at performance measures and if they're properly documented and if we're meeting those. The other area that would be really helpful in looking at would be around asset and the use of federal grants and state grants where we purchase assets and how those assets are disposed of or retained and who's retaining them, and just an overall inventory of all of our assets. Those are areas that would be good to look at.
Gotcha. Okay, just so one final point related to that is, and again, in the spirit of where the chair was coming from, if we're talking about messaging to the board, it sounds to me like, you're talking about federal grants, et cetera. Arguably, if you had another person, and I'll just make up the number, if there's an investment of $150,000 in another person, it sounds like you could be auditing an incremental several $100 million worth of programs. And it seems, it's counterintuitive that in auditing several $100 million or maybe $500 million, I don't know what it would be, that you wouldn't find some positive return on investment of having that one incremental auditor. Does that characterization sound directionally reasonable to you?
Oh, absolutely. And one thing is what we're all facing is, unfortunately, it's at this point, I think Hassan and management doesn't disagree that we need more staff, and they're not even they're being completely supportive at this time. Hassan has made statements that he will find the funding to give me the staff that's needed, which is, I believe, because of what he has seen that we've been giving him in the last 3 years. And, though there were some growing pains, he sees the benefit himself as a CEO on having more audit staff and looking at things on a continuous basis versus 5 years later and it all blows up. And so I think he totally supports that. Yeah, the more staff Mary has to support, and we supported initially 15 positions for our size agency. I believe he is very supportive of that. The problem that I'm facing right now is just getting staff. And so, I would love to have some additional positions, but I'm struggling right now is that we have positions and we can't even get them filled.
I hear you. I think maybe just, and I defer to the mayor and Councilmember Zito, Councilmember Musgrove, and how to effectively communicate this to the board. But it strikes me the simple message of, if you give me another person, I can audit another $500 million worth of programs, might help them understand what we're talking about here. So in any case, thank you for the collaboration.
Thanks, Stuart. Ed, what's your comments?
Well, my blood pressure's down, and classically, the ride from El Cajon, I was within 1.5 miles of my own home. But I'm good. So Mary Kay, all your comments are fantastic, but I'm trying to look at it from two different perspectives. And if I'm off base, shut me down. But first of all, we need to pay or have a pay range for those additional staff to encourage them, because when you run short and they come in and they see what the office looks like and the workload, sometimes the dollars don't compensate. So if we can't bridge that gap, are we or can we consider setting aside funds for those times when Mary Kay needs work that she can contract it outside, where there are auditors that can come in and work on a project for a specific fund, specific amount of money, and a reasonable timeline to get these projects done? Is that something that could be on the table? Thank you.
And I like that idea. I am always prefer permanent staff versus contracted staff. I just don't think we get the best bang for our buck. And I think we need permanent staff. So I think rather than paying a contractor 300% more than we would pay a permanent staff, why not just pay our permanent staff more? And I think that's what we're struggling with. Is I have had a couple of issues with people going, I can't live in San Diego for that pay, and
so here's my concern, Mary Kay, and the other members of the board. This is my second year on the audit committee, and we've struggled through it that entire time, and I'm sure before then. But at some point, we will have this organization under a microscope, and that we didn't have the auditors in place after all this time is probably not the best answer to give. So again, I don't know, Mary Kay, if there are just no auditors out there, or we're not able to hire them into the organization or away from someone else, I think we need to come up with a better answer. We really do.
Yeah, and actually, to jump in a little bit that, Mary Kay, I think the request here is maybe you've been somewhat clear before, but to perhaps for a future topic, just to figure out, you know, what do we see as the primary barriers to hiring? I mean, in all transparency, we know that it's freakishly difficult to get employees in general right now in the current hiring environment. There's just, in most areas that I'm dealing with, there's just a shortage of people looking for jobs. But I think, Mary, for example, you've made previous comments that one of the bigger barriers might actually be being able to work remotely versus as opposed to just the compensation. So that's all.
That is true, Chair, and I did alleviate that problem by putting a remote flex in place, but it's again the pay. I mean, I have, you know, I have people in San Diego that I've reached out to that would be awesome to come to the organization, and I will be frank, is the culture and the dollar is what they've shared with me.
Okay, good to know. Sorry to interrupt, Ed. Were you done then? Okay. Bob, you're next.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thanks. I'm in a bad signal area. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to kind of dovetail on what a lot of people have been saying. In particular, the fraud hotline, Mary. You and I have both talked a lot about that. In my experience, the more successful that hotline is, you can expect that the calls are going to become even more prevalent, and your hours are going to be used more and more in that area without having somebody else in there that can kind of take over some of those investigations. I do think Chair Zito, as you commented on, and I think Stuart commented on it, and a couple of other people, is that the board needs to know, one, the amount of work that Mary, not just simply the audit plan. The audit plan is an estimate of what Mary thinks she can get done with the staff that she will hopefully have. But again, there's work outside of that that should be done. And I think, and I don't know exactly, I'll leave that up to Chair Zito and Mayor Vasquez, the best way to get this out to the full board. Because I think it's really important for them to understand that there's a lot more work that needs to be done if Mary had, you know, the additional staff. And I was glad to hear that Hassan and some of the executive are in support of that. That goes a long ways. But again, that was just kind of my comment here. So,
thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Ms. Wong Nickerson.
Yeah, I just have a question. Like, I guess I don't really understand the process. I mean, it sounds like we all recognize the value of Mary's office. I think this group definitely support the idea that she need to have more staff because the return on investment is totally worth it. Hassan and the management is supportive. So is the board the final decision maker on hiring just one extra person when there's I don't understand if it's a budgetary issue or what is the issue here? I mean, Sandak has over $1 billion, you know, annual budget. So I have a hard time understanding. I don't understand why this is not able to move forward.
I think, Agnes, it's a combination. You know, initially, I think it was a culture shock. Having us come in was more of a internal look at things in a very deep dive. So there was some culture shock going on. I think that's leaving. I think it's getting definitely much better. We have people in management, including Hassan, that is now seeing the benefits. But what still is being struggled with is the pay, the amount of work that is committed. I mean, you know, auditors don't have free time here. I don't have free time here. We don't have time like other staff have where, and I'm not saying other staff's not busy, but we're freakishly, crazily busy to where, you know, I have the staff that left that said, we don't feel supported by the board. We're exhausted and this isn't worth the money. I mean, I've lost 2 principals that basically put that straight out to me. And I can tell you myself, I feel for them. And I know that I have fought for my own staff. I almost lost one who, thank gosh, I had the support of management to get him enough to keep him. But I almost lost him. And I had put a lot of time and effort in training him. And he's a great auditor. That would be a big loss to OPA. But for me to be able to get more staff, I need money and I need a better culture. And that culture thing takes time and it gets worked out as support happens and, you know, board members show support, which I think is getting better, and management shows that we're working together and that we both want this. That helps with culture, and not the attackatory stuff that, of course, sadly is seen in the media sometimes doesn't help. But frankly, I have a lot of connections with really good auditors at the state and local level. And frankly, those are the barriers. Is like, you're working a lot more than I'm willing to work for that pay. And it's not in the best environment. So I'll have to pass, Mary. And so that's what I'm trying to work on. And I think Hassan has been very helpful. I think Colleen and Ray, that whole relationship that is now being out there is helpful. And frankly, the last couple of meetings, the board has shown a whole lot more support than ever before around OPA. And I'm hoping to continue to see that. Again, it's a growing pain, right? It's something that takes time that people have to kind of warm up to, because nobody likes to be audited. And we're really doing some auditing here because it hasn't been done this deep and for a very long time.
Thanks, Mary. So good discussion. I think we've got a general takeaway. We need to recommend that this plan get forwarded to the board, which I believe we're all fully in support of. And along those lines, I would go ahead and move that we do so, along with, I really like Stuart's idea, if you're comfortable with that, Mary, and mine, just some context in the report. And I think I'd be happy to work with you on this, or somebody else would, just around what isn't, as Stuart said, what isn't in the audit plan, what could be accomplished with more staff, as well as the risk that we're going to be taking around the fraud, waste, and abuse by not having a dedicated person there as well, just so the board sees that. That will then potentially lead to a conversation around, well, how do we fix that? Which then we can just, you're obviously clearly already prepared to answer what you need in order to get that fixed. So
yeah, and I'm happy to put that. Yeah, I'm happy to put that additional information, Chair, in the summary. Right. And then it will leave that platform open for discussion with the board.
That'd be perfect. So that'd be my motion. If anyone cared a second.
Second. I'll second.
Was that Ed or Bob?
That was me. That was Bob.
Okay, thanks. Motion by Zito, second by Bob. Call for the vote, please.
On item number 6, Chair Zito.
Zito, yes.
Vice Chair Vasquez.
Vasquez, yes.
Ms. Wong Nickerson.
Yes.
Mr. Halpern.
Halpern, yes.
And Mr. Monson.
Monson, yes.
That item passes unanimously.
Great, thanks everybody. Now we'll move on to item 7, the purchase card audit. And I believe, Mary, if I saw your email correctly, that Hassan's going to take part A of this and you'll take part B.
Actually, I think Colleen now is going to be doing that.
Okay, Colleen. Okay, Colleen.
Yes, thank you, Chair and Audit Committee members. I'm very pleased to be here with you today to provide you with an update on our purchase card audit action plan and bring forward to you specific policies that were called for in the action plan that we're going to be asking for your recommendation today to move forward. And I've really appreciated your discussion here and just want to make it very clear that on behalf of management, we appreciate greatly working with Mary, because everything that comes out of these audits make us a better organization. And I think something that was said at the most recent board meeting is that we're dealing with policies that have been in place for 20+ years. And now we're finally kind of pulling back, the blanket, so to speak, pulling it all apart and really modernizing how we do our business, and with the goal of very good policies, clear policies, procedures in place that the whole agency understands how to follow, being extremely good stewards of taxpayer dollars and doing that again in full transparency. So here's what we have before you today. The action plan had 16 specific actions to be taken. And we are at the point now where we have 9 of those complete. Some of those are what we're bringing to you here today. There are 5 that are in progress, and those 5 go back to looking back at a number of receipts to see if there was anything that needs to be paid back. That work is ongoing. We anticipate wrapping that up by the middle of July. I think July 15th is our date to complete that. And then there are 2 actions that we are postponing, and that's for the training on the policies that are before you today. And we're postponing the training until the Sandag Board of Directors approves those policies, just in case there's any changes between now and then. We want to do the training on those board approved policies. So that's the big picture on where we are with the action plan. What's before you today for your consideration and a recommendation to the Board of Directors are 3 policies. So one is a complete rewrite of the purchase card, or otherwise known as the P card policy. And that's really been tightened up to specify that there are only certain people in the agency who are permitted to have a Sandag credit card, the kinds of purchases that are allowed with a credit card, and then all the roles and responsibilities for card holder, supervisor, and manager in terms of approving all of those payments on a regular basis. So those are the primary aspects of that P card audit. It also talks about, or the P card policy, it also talks about spending limits and everything that we learned in the audit. We've done everything we can to put clear policies and procedures in place to prohibit some of these things, or these things from happening in the future. So that's the first. And then there are 2 additional policies that really get to the question of food. So one of them is a new policy, which we call business meals. And this lays out specifically what can be considered a business meal, who can host a business meal, and then limits the cost of a business meal to per diems that are set by the federal government. So we're doing everything we can to align with where there are other national, federal type policies. So for example, if there is a business meal that I have the ability to host a business meal for a specific Sandag business purpose, and that the cost of that meal can't per person go over what the current per diem rate is. So it depends on what the current rate is, but let's just say it's $13 per person for breakfast. So if I take individuals out for a breakfast meeting with a specific purpose for Sandag business, we can't exceed that $13 per person for breakfast. So this really puts a cap on the cost. And then the additional piece is that we provide regular reports to the Board of Directors on business meal meetings that were held, the purpose, and the attendees. And so that will be a regular report that will be available to the public, so we're being completely transparent. The third policy is what we call hospitality and events. And again, it's how food is provided at events such as we had the North Coast Corridor project opening on Saturday. We want to be able to provide refreshments to the public. Or let's say there is an outreach meeting where we're asking the public or stakeholders to come to a meeting and weigh in on a draft plan. These events, same thing, we tie the per person cost back to the federal guidance on per diem rates. Similarly, this is where we talk about Sandag board meetings, or even your audit committee meetings, where we have, say, coffee or some sort of refreshments because your meeting is happening during meal times. It also sets these limits and ties them back again to that federal guidance. So really tightening up these policies significantly. So those are the three that are before you. We had planned to bring this to you at your last meeting last month. And as we were getting closer to posting the report, we realized there were some differences between what management was proposing and what the independent auditor had in mind. We sat down, hashed through all of that. So we're at a point now where we're in complete alignment and agreement going forward. So I really want to thank the SANDAG team members who worked really hard. We were going away at trying to get this exactly right, so there's complete clarity on the path forward, and really appreciate the collaboration with the auditor too, that we really rolled up our sleeves and went line by line through every single one of these policies, every single sentence, to make sure that we were putting ourselves in a really good position going forward to make sure that we're following processes and procedures. These are implementable. We can report them clearly and transparently. And so I'm proud to be able to bring these forward to you today. And I'll turn it back to you, Chair, to answer any questions that the members may have, and look forward to your recommendation to the Board of Directors. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. I think I'll probably just go to Mary, your part of the presentation first, and we'll take questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So basically, just as Colleen said, we met a couple of times. It went back and forth. I provided several comments on different drafts each time in writing, and shared sort of their consideration, asking them to think about both public perception, best practices, and of course, laws, rules, and regulations. And there was a final sit down, which I think was most beneficial. Hopefully we can do that more in the front end of having these reviews versus at the back end, because it would have probably saved us a lot of time. But Colleen and I and Ray sat down and we did go line by line, and we did have discussions, and I think that was very beneficial to do that. They did end up coming with a finalized draft that I believe is sufficient to help ensure that the purchase card policy and the use of public dollars around the purchase card, as well as even if you're reimbursed without using the purchase card, is sufficient to ensure that good system controls are in place and that the card would not be used inappropriately or misused, as well as even if you were going to get reimbursed. So if they adhere to this policy, I think it's a great policy. It's very detailed. The support required is very sufficient. And the fact that they're going to be reporting it to the audit committee and the board is even more telling that they're true about this and that they want to be very transparent. And then, as you've seen on the audit plan, to ensure that they're following what they say they're going to follow, they're doing what they say they're going to do, we are going to be doing continuous auditing around it, which will just further strengthen the fact that what they say they're going to do, they actually do.
Great.
So if you have any questions?
Thank you, Mary. Tessa, looks like we may have a question or a comment from the public.
Yes, Chair, we have one public commenter, Dr. Belage. Please go ahead and unmute yourself to speak.
Thank you for tolerating I'll try to make it a quick comment. It's about the business meal part of the presentation. And mostly because I don't think I really have a clear understanding myself. Are there conflicts between tax consequences as to the tax status of SANDAG as an organization, so that this is more meeting those kind of standards as opposed to either bylaw or business standards, which would allow some flexibility if taxes were paid on those items? And I apologize if it's a kind of an ignorant question.
Thank you, Dr.
Do you want me to answer that, Cito?
Yeah, why don't staff address the question?
really quickly, so there can be tax consequences on a personal matter. So just like when public employees are traveling on business for any type of Sandag business, we get a per diem. And really the IRS has the right to audit that to ensure that there was no income from that transaction. So basically any meal should be fully supported, that it does not go below what they were reimbursed. And if it does, then the difference of that would be taxable income. And so that tax implication is always there. But in this case, around this policy, if they're on the business, they're only being reimbursed or using the purchase card for the actual cost, not anything more than that. So it really wouldn't be a tax implication there.
Thanks, Mary. Seeing no other public comment, are there any board member comments or questions? Ms. Wong Nickerson.
Yeah, thank you, Mary and Colleen. I think it is a very well thought out, very detailed, very clear policies, all three of them. So I really appreciate the effort, that went into it. I actually do have a question about the business meals portion. I know that the rate is pegged to I think it must be an Irs per diem rate. And I looked it up. For breakfast is 17, lunch 18, and dinner is 34. My question is, I understand this is like taxpayer dollars, but at the same time, I'm thinking it's not that easy to have $34 for dinner in San Diego. So I just want to make sure, we don't want to make it overly restrictive so that it's not workable from a business perspective. Because I do appreciate that, you limit only basically the CEO, the deputy CEO can host business meals. So it's a very small number. I just want to make sure whatever we put in place is not overly restrictive. But I also don't know what other, agencies in the city, what their limits are if they have similar policies. So can you comment on that?
Yes, I can, Agnes. Actually, so it depends on where you're at. So for the city of San Diego, I believe it is 17, 20 something and 34. But we are, and it is the federal rate for federal employees, which most state and local governments follow to ensure that we're being prudent. And so this is really about, if we need to have a business meal out, we need to be prudent because it's public dollars. So we then have to consider, where are we going to have a meal? And I know I agree with you, $34 in San Diego lately is not easy. It's possible, but it's definitely not, your options are not wide open, right? But I live right here in the city of San Diego, and I can tell you, I often eat out for dinner, and my bills don't often exceed $25. So I feel if I can be prudent with my own dollars, then Sandag employees can be prudent with public dollars. And again, this is a need to go out somewhere because it happens to be around a meal time and have those meals. This isn't, something an added benefit because we want to go wine and dine somebody, right? That's not the intention of spending public dollars on meals for any public employee, is to go out and be wined and dine. It's really, it meets a need because we're around a time that we have to feed each other, but we're not going to be able to go to, the Charter House or somewhere like that. We're probably going to have to stick around the pier or, somewhere such as a Mexican restaurant down on the pier or something. You could get a pretty good meal for that. So just from an audit perspective, and understand that it's a conservative perspective, I believe $34 and the GSA rates are fair.
Thanks for that, Mary. I think my takeaway from that is you don't drink enough. But
I just do it when I get home.
There you go. Relative to your comment, Mary, 34 does seem really chintzy at times, but then again, it doesn't seem quite as bad if you realize that you can't have alcoholic drinks, because that's where a lot of your budget really kicks in. But yeah, it's very doable, albeit it's not going to be at the top-notch restaurants, noting that you're not including alcohol in there because they're not allowed to use alcohol anyway.
Right.
Bob, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, just real quick. Again, I'll make the same comment that Agnes had made. I thought all three of these policies were very well written. They cover the areas of risk where for these particular areas. My one question was for Colleen, and you may have addressed this and I just didn't pick up on it. Once these policies presented to the board, they're passed, is there going to be opportunities to train employees, especially those that have P cards, those that are more involved in setting up these events and things like that? That was my question.
Yes, there is. And that's in the action plan to conduct training. And so that's one of the action plan items that we postponed until after the board approves policies, because the board could change something. We don't know. So assuming the board approves them at the Sandag Board of Directors approves them at their next meeting, we will absolutely right then begin the training on the card usage.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Colleen.
And just to clarify, if I may, we're going to be doing training on all of the policies, not just the credit card policy, but all of them. So all staff will be trained who have some role, whether it's, using a card, hosting a meal, a reviewer role, all of that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Stuart, you have a question?
Yeah, just one. I'm wondering, Mary, if you could just give us a little bit of perspective as to your attitude on approach of continuous auditing in this area. Given our prior conversation about how much more additional risk there is that, is unlikely to get covered with current staffing levels, one wonders if there's a point in time where there might be diminishing returns of continuous auditing in a particular area like this, given that there are so many other areas of risk that are likely to be uncovered. Thanks.
Mary, you're muted.
Sorry. We have a lot less continuous auditing hours allocated to the purchase card on continuous auditing. But if anyone has ever been in government, and you'll ask any government auditor this, purchase cards are one of the highest abused areas in a government entity, agency. And in aggregate, it's pretty, dollar-wise, it's pretty high too. But when we look at risk, Stuart, we're not just looking at, because if you want to look at a contract, yeah, there's $1 billion contract. If you want to audit $1 billion contract or a purchase card, what's going to give you the most impact, right? It's probably going to be the $1 billion contract. But that doesn't mean you should not pay attention to, or that you should ignore other areas of the organization. Purchase cards an area of high risk, and it's highly abused, and often in all government agencies. It's something that should be tracked, but most importantly, as auditors, we not only look at the dollar materiality or impact on something, we look at the public perception risk. And if I send out that a contractor mischarged Sandag by $100,000, I can promise you the public's going to get mad, but they're going to get a lot more mad if I put out a report and they find that somebody spent $1,000 on a meal on a purchase card. It's the public perception of, are you abusing my public dollars on something such as outings for employees on meals that shouldn't happen? So you have to consider not just the dollar risk, but also the public perception risk when you're auditing, and try to balance that. So definitely the purchase card hours, a lot smaller and a lot easier to do a continuous auditing around that brings trust back to Sandag. and brings the public feeling like okay, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing with my funds, and still be able to address the hours of contracts and make sure that that's being managed.
Gotcha. And I totally agree with you conceptually, just a little bit more granular perhaps. So you'll be developing sort of a statistical based sampling process that over time, the results of your sampling testing will impact the sort of hours that go into it, and the statistical model will determine whether, if things are getting much better, you can spend less time on it, et cetera. Is that going to be the approach?
Absolutely. So this is the first year that we're seeing, are they going to follow the policies they put in place? So there's a little bit more hours there. Next year, if we see that they're adhering and we're not having any findings, we're going to only maybe allocate 200 hours to that for the whole year. And all we'll do is a simple scan of 100% of the transactions, and we'll do analytics on it to have something that looks odd or large poke bad at us, and we can do that in 20 hours, do a review of that in 20 hours. And so the number of hours will definitely go much smaller if they're adhering to it, and we see that this year, but we still need to make sure we're diligent around it because it is an area of risk, more, like I said, in the eyes of the public versus the dollar amount.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Stuart and Mary. I did have one, slightly detailed question about what was in here, and probably should have taken this offline. We can do that if that's better as well. But just noticing the OPA recommendation number 9 on page 12 of the report, the recommendation was written as that a monthly or quarterly listing of transaction by user be provided. The proposed action seemed to be, well, we're going to change that into a summary report will be prepared for the CFO and CEO and provided to the board of directors or audit committee upon request. So we went by user transaction to a summary report by request. And then when I look at the status of what's in the report, it actually says the summary report will be provided to the audit committee and the board, not just upon request. And so my takeaway is that on this particular item is that there will be summary reports coming to the audit committee about this. My assumption is that if someone on the audit committee wanted a transaction by user output, they could get that from the staff if they wanted such a thing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I was just trying to suss all that out. With that, seeing no other, Colleen.
Chair, if I may, one thing I just want to be super clear on, because some of you brought up alcohol. I want to be super clear that we do not spend any taxpayer dollars on alcohol ever. That is prohibited. I understand when you go out, that probably doubles the cost of a meal, but we are not talking about alcohol with any of the meals that we're talking about here. I know everyone here knows this. I just thought it was really important to clarify that for the public, how important that is.
Yes, good. Thanks for the clarity. Apologies if my statement wasn't clear. I think that was my statement, was since we can't do alcohol, that keeps the cost down. So it makes the $34 more reasonable. But since that's been abused, it's really good to be very clear on that particular item. And yes, Hassan, you can jump in.
Yeah. So thank you, Mary and Colleen, and committee members. Thank you for the discussion. I would just say to Ms. Nickerson's point about I've been in this business for 30 years, and even a couple of decades ago, Mary, I don't know where you're dying, but I'm gonna follow you because I don't like to spend a lot. But when you travel to DC or you're in San Diego, take alcohol aside, it's really hard, regardless of what you eat. It's hard to stay with the limit. But nevertheless, I believe Mary is right. I think there's a perception here. I can tell you that all the audit that you've seen about, there were nobody doing anything wrong or anything, not sandbag business, but the perception is the perception. There were $0 invested in alcohol, would never be. I mean, any public employee with the least brain will know that alcohol is a no-no. So having said all of that, I think for the sake of, back to Mary's point, of making sure that the agency is being true to holding controls and policies in the right place. That doesn't mean that 2 years from now, if we find out that, you know, the poor CEO or deputy CEO is paying a lot from their pocket, which they are, maybe we go back to you and say, maybe you need to look at this. But for now, I think we agreed with management, and Mary agreed that this is good for the agency. And as I told the board, and I told you, this is not the last time you're going to have findings of this nature. We have a lot of areas where controls and policies are needed, and we're going to do what we can. I just, look, this is my hope. And to you as the audit committee member, I can tell you that. I hope that you don't, these audits are not used for more than what they are. They are about controls and policy and making sure the public funds are guarded, not about politics and political speeches. Because that could end up hurt the agency regardless of what we do. And we don't want to discourage the direction where the agency is going. But I just want to thank you, thank Marina and Colleen and Mary and Colleen. And I want you to know that we're committed to fixing what's need to be fixed.
And I think it's important to note here, by the way, even though I totally agree with it, I actually didn't, it wasn't my recommendation to use the GSA rate for the CEO and the assistants. I never even made that suggestion or recommendation. Now, I would recommend it for when we have employees that we're buying, you know, a lunch for or something as a group. When we're getting bagels and stuff like that, you can buy a lot of bagels for $17. So, you know, those areas I recommend the GSA rate, but I never actually recommended, but was quite pleasantly surprised when management on their own limited Hassan and the two CEOs to the GSA rate, because frankly, I wouldn't have disputed the need to maybe spend more. Though again, from a conservative auditor, I was happy to see it and definitely support it.
So we'll go by eating the steak sauce, not the steak. We're good. We can keep it.
Hassan, I have a list of great restaurants in Little Italy and on the pier that you can actually buy a dinner for that.
So, Hassan, anytime you want, just let me know. Come up to Solana Beach, great little town.
Yeah, happy to.
I promise I can get you lots of good food for $34 or less per person. I would be happy to take you anytime. Just let me know.
Thank you.
I wholly empathize. I don't think it's possible in DC though. So
well, DC gets a different rate though, so that's
right.
a good thing.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you again. Thank you,
Yes.
members and
thanks Hassan for re-emphasizing. I don't like it either when our findings get politicized. I wish there was something to do that could be done about it. I think it's pretty obvious that hasn't come out of this committee at this point. It's more of a problem at the board level that hopefully we can come up with some sort of solution to eventually. But anyway, so with that, I do believe we need a motion to forward this on to the board, if anybody's so inclined.
Chair Zito, I
I'll
would
submit-
motion that.
I'll second.
Okay, I believe I heard a motion by Mr. Monson and a second by
Yes.
Mayor Vasquez.
Correct.
Vote.
On item 7, Chair Zito,
Zito, yes.
Vice Chair Vasquez,
Yes.
Ms. Wong Nickerson,
Wong Nickerson, yes.
Mr. Halpern,
Halpern, yes.
and Mr. Monson.
Monson, yes.
That item passes unanimously.
Great. We are now moving on to item 8, Transportation Development Act Triennial Performance Audits. And looks like the item will be presented by Brian and Yonel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Brian Lane. I'm a senior transit planner here at Sandag, and I'm with Grant from Kinley Horn, who will present the audit findings. So we're here to present the reports and answer questions from you. Sorry for the delay in getting those out to you. I'm not sure if you did have the time to dive into them, but we'll go over the details of this and at a detailed level and a high level, and be happy to answer any questions you have, knowing you may not have been able to dive in yet to the reports. Just for your information, we're going to go after today. We'll be going to the Transportation Committee next Friday asking them to recommend that the board of directors on the 24th allow us to send this to the state for their approval. So with that, I'll hand it over to Yanel, and then we'll be happy to answer questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. So again, I'm Yanel Grant from Kimley Horn, and here to present the findings for the TDA performance audit for this past cycle, FY 2019 to 2021. Next slide, please. We have a 4-part agenda. First, a couple of items are just real quick as a refresher about what the TDA is and what our approach for the audit was. We're going to be spending the bulk of our time with the last 2 items, which are the TDA performance indicators and what they look like for the different agencies, as well as the recommendations. Next slide, please. Transportation Development Act, hard to believe that it's about 50 years old now. It's a very significant source of operations funding for agencies throughout California. It is managed by Caltrans as an entity, and it is a required audit that every agency that's recipient needs to go through an outside auditor. The last cycle, there was a very important legislation which impacted the way that Farebox recovery ratio is calculated. In this current cycle, there have been 2 bills that were passed, Assembly Bill 90 and Assembly Bill 149. Both bills provide an exemption on how to meet Farebox recovery targets given the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the AB 90 provides relief, or basically an exemption for the first 2 years, or actually the last two years of the 3-year audit period. And then AB 149 provides a relief for the following 2 years. Next slide, please. So our approach is really what I like to qualify as a balanced approach. It's not kind of a got you type of audit. I like to say is we like to point out the good things happening, the things that we notice as external reviewers that could merit some improvement. We try to be constructive throughout the process and really focus on causes, not the symptoms. The recommendations, we try to make them in a way that are pragmatic and implementable. We share the findings with the operators as we develop them, and as also with SANDAG as the RTPA, so that they're in agreement, we're in agreement, and we have something that's in a no surprises type of situation. Next slide, please. And so the really big story, and this is not going to be a surprise, is that the transit ridership tanked with COVID-19. And you know, my ex-boss he coined it in a way that he says it was a global calamity as far as, you know, public transportation. And so it's not unique to San Diego. This has affected the agencies in San Diego just like they have all over California, and frankly all over the US, and frankly all over the world. But so keep in mind that we were looking back at a 3-year period of time, starting from July 1, 2018, all the way to 2021, June 30, 2021. And so the pandemic affected 16 out of those 36 months. So the pandemic affected 44% of this period. What we saw is the ridership for the first year. So the first year, FY19, there was basically no COVID. And so it was a continuation. Ridership was pretty much flat. MTS actually eked out a very small increase in the ridership, but the governor effectively shut down the economy in the final quarter of FY 2020. And so that's when we saw the big changes. And the way we measure it is we look at the end of FY 2018 compared to the end of FY 2021. So during 3 years, look at this, bus and light rail, ridership is down between 50 and 60%, demand response between 69 and 79%, and commuter rail down was hit the hardest, as much as 89%. And so it's a universal loss, as I said, across the states. Next slide, please. So as far as the TDA legislation, there are basically what I call 5+1 performance indicators that we look at. We have cost efficiency, cost effectiveness, a couple of service productivity measures, and also a measure of labor productivity. The final, which is this +1, is the Farebox recovery ratio. And this is simply fair revenues divided by operating cost. Next slide, please. So first we'll talk about MTS, then we'll talk about NCTD, and then we'll talk about SANDAG. So MTS, obviously local operator to Metropolitan San Diego. What we found was the system-wide operating cost per revenue vehicle hour actually increased. They implemented some ridership policies, and they were able to kind of grow it a little bit. And so but the measure in terms of system-wide operating costs, they managed to keep that below the inflation rate. And so 3.2 is less than 7.7, so that's good. Now, every other measure tanked. I mean, anything involving passengers in the calculation. So if you try to calculate, how much does it cost to carry a rider, and you've got, pretty much a lot of the set fixed costs, some variable costs, but the operating costs didn't change that much, but the number of passengers you carry was a lot less. So these were very, very severely impacted, and you'll see that on the next slide. MTS did reduce overall staffing by 6.5%. So that's about 163 positions that they effectively cut, comparing again, 2018 to 2021. Next slide, please. And there's going to be a lot of statistics here. Don't worry, we're not going to be covering every single number. I just want to point out a couple of items to you. On the second row of the data, you can see the unlinked passengers. That is basically your ridership. And you can see that between 18 and 21, we're down 54%. And this is all modes together. There are obviously differences between the modes. But then you look at the 5 measures below that, those are the 5 measures that TDA tracks. And you can see that operating cost per revenue vehicle hour actually increased, but it increased less than inflation, which is shown at the bottom with a CPI of 7.7%. But then the next 3 measures below, 123 and negative 53 for service productivity, those were heavily impacted. Next slide, please. So I want to spend a little bit of time on Farebox recovery ratio because it's important. And you can imagine that it was also affected by the ridership drop. And so we can see that in FY 2021, the Farebox recovery ratio was down to 16.4% from 31.7%. So it was down almost 50%. Historically, in the TDA legislation, they have set some minimums, and it's in the case of MTS, it's 20%, but that's prior to applying SB 508. So SB 508 gives you the ability to make some adjustments to operating costs and also adjustments to revenues. And if they do that, then the system-wide Farebox recovery ratio increases to above 20%. But regardless of Senate Bill 508, it's kind of moot because Assembly Bill 90 gives MTS a buy because of COVID. And they said, you're exempt from this year. You don't have to make the 20% Farebox recovery ratio. Next slide, please. And now we'll move on to the recommendations. Is we found that MTS is in full compliance with all the PUC code requirements. We had a couple of recommendations from the last cycle, and they reasonably, actually just one, and they reasonably addressed that prior recommendation. And so there's just one recommendation offered for this cycle, which kind of mirrors one that we have for NCTD as well as SANDAG, is to work with the SANDAG TDA staff to achieve greater alignment with respect to the various uses and external reporting of Farebox recovery ratio, which there's multiple uses, and it's not done in a very consistent way across the whole county. Next slide, please. And we'll switch over to NCTD now. So NCTD, very different system, further north, a much less urbanized area, but still, multiple, fairly dense population pockets. What we found here was NCTD operating costs were higher than inflation, 11% versus 7%. They had some temporary reductions in the coaster. But one of the things that merits to be pointed out on some of these rail services is they have a lot of fixed costs that are independent of service levels. And what I mean by that is they have a lot of inspections and maintenance that are required by FRA, which are time-based. And so they have nothing to do with the level of ridership. What we found was cost effectiveness and service productivity were also very severely impacted by COVID, similar to MTS. And they reduced staff more than MTS did. And they reduced staffing by 12% during the audit period, which was almost 100 positions. Next slide, please. So in terms of the statistics, you can see this here in a tabular form. Operating costs were up, almost 11%. You can see the ridership was down 58%. And that's kind of a reflective of they've got like a true commuter rail system, and that was hit disproportionately hard compared to some of the bus system and the Sprinter system. If you look at the Tda indicators, which are at the bottom of the table, you can see the operating cost per service hour was up significantly, but the cost effectiveness and service productivity measures were also hit very, very badly, just like they were in the MTS case. Now, we're not talking about FY22 yet. We know that a lot of the ridership levels have recovered significantly since June of 2021. But again, these audits are always backward facing, and we're looking at the last 3 years as they ended in June 30, 21. Next slide, please. So the Farebox recovery ratio, here we have a long table, and you can see that towards the top here, 3 years ago, the system-wide Farebox recovery ratio for NCTD was about 16%, and that is down to 5.5%. For their demand response, it was a little bit higher at 6.4%. Now, when they do the adjustments using the increases from the revenues they can do under the guidelines of Senate Bill 508, as well as some of the reductions in operating costs, they actually make their Farebox recovery ratio jump to 25.8%. If you look at some of the Farebox recovery numbers that are in the table, you can see how much they have decreased. And you can see 62%, 86%, 53% drops. These are very significant drops. And in talking to Matt Tucker, who is the executive director, he said to me, frankly, cost containment was not a priority for NCTD during this period. And really it was to continue to provide a lifeline service to a lot of folks. And they actually did a lot of great things around state of good repair and some projects that they were able to advance significantly without having, as heavy of a load of ridership as they usually do. Next slide, please. And so in terms of the conclusions for NCTD, they're in compliance with all the PUC requirements we found. There were 2 recommendations from the prior audit period, which we felt were meaningfully addressed. And we can move on to the next slide. Is that for this cycle, the recommendation is, again, around this Farebox recovery, which frankly causes some confusion, both with the staff and with board members, because we've come to a situation where we're using 2 different measures. There's the pure Farebox recovery ratio, which is used for NTD reporting, for example, and this modified Farebox recovery ratio or adjusted Farebox recovery ratio that is used as a result of this Senate Bill 508, which shows higher numbers. And so we're saying work with SANDAG, achieve greater alignment, better understanding for which you use in which case. And so that we're very clear, and we're also very clear about what exemptions mean, like, what's eligible under, the new calculation. Next slide, please. And so finally, we turn to SANDAG and for the RTPA, and SANDAG and the Full Access and Consolidated Transportation should work together. to review and update the scope of FACT contractual responsibilities and identify additional funding. That was completed during the course of the last audit cycle, and continue efforts to update Policy 27 and the SANDAG TDA Climb Manual to address statutory changes. Let me just pause for a second and say we consider this one to be partially complete. During the first 30 or so years of the TDA, there basically was no change in Policy 27. And so the TDA Claim Manual just kept on going. It was the same. But over the last 6 to 8 years or so, it's been there's been a lot happening. And so, there's been the, getting back after the recession, the Great Recession, and then, having this pandemic happen and different Senate bills, different Assembly bills happening. Seems like every year or every 2 years there's something new happening. And so this leads me to the next slide. Next slide, please, in terms of our recommendations. And so for SANDAG's recommendations, this one, number one, is to really set up a process to annually review both of these important documents, to update them as appropriate, and to make sure to sit down and communicate with NCTD and MTS so that there's consistency across the region. The second one is that SANDAG and FACT should jointly enhance the role of the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, otherwise known as SSTAC, to advise on unmet transit needs. And the last one is one that we kind of struggled a little bit to frame, but SANDAG as an organization has been through a lot of organizational change, both during the last audit period and also during the last 8 months, with a sort of matrix structure that has evolved. We think is very, very positive, but the recommendation that goes along with that is to basically, given this recent reorg to a matrix structure, is to implement motivation and alignment strategies to bring the whole of SANDAG staff along. And I think that is my last slide. Can we see what the... Yes, so happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much for your time, and here's my contact information.
Thanks, Janelle. Thorough presentation. Do we have any questions from members of the public or comments? Don't see any.
I see no hands raised, Chair. There are no public comments.
And I know we're a little bit over, but any board member comments or questions of, raise your hand. Well, I don't see, you did such a thorough job. I think we answered all the questions up front.
I tired everybody.
Once again, thanks for that very thorough presentation. It's a tricky one to evaluate, as you say, just because of COVID and what that did to our transit agencies. But hopefully, we're well on our way from recovering from that, and we'll return more to normal. But thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So with that, we're coming to the end of the meeting. Our next audit committee meeting has been scheduled for Friday, July 8th, 2022 at 12:30 p.m. That takes us to the end. And as I stated at the beginning, I am going to adjourn the meeting in memory of my sweet daughter, Mary Claire Zito. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Zito.
Thank you, Chair Zito.